So we're at TrustCon, and I'm here with Jerrel Peterson, the Director of Content Policy at Spotify. Jerrel, welcome to TrustCon. Are you excited for the week?
I really am. TrustCon is a lot. It's a lot of people, so I'm pacing myself, and I did a lot of hugs, a lot of smiles already this morning, and so looking forward. It's always a good time.
Well, I really appreciate you joining me today. We're going to talk trust and safety.
Okay.
We're not going to dive into specific trust and safety outcomes or talk the merits of current regulation in the world. I'm really interested in highlighting the humans that make up this space, that helped create trust and safety. And so we're going to focus a lot on your journey, about your experience, and I think whether or not you are a trust and safety pro or maybe you're looking to get into the field, I hope that you find this really, really useful and helpful. So, Director of Content Policy at Spotify, give us a 2 or 3 minute commercial on like the day-to-day for you. Like, what does that mean in reality?
Yeah. So in reality, my team is responsible for researching and writing the rules that govern the content that's on a given platform. That's what content policy means generally. And so a lot of times we are looking at the abuse trends in the industry. We are looking at the new experiences that we're creating on the platform and really thinking through how they could go wrong, how they could be misused, what kinds of harms are created. Our team exists primarily to minimize the potential for offline harm. But there's lots of other kinds of harms too that are somewhat subjective. And so my team is thinking about reputational, financial, emotional harms as well, and writing about it and trying to help the business think differently about what our role should be and getting them to move in a direction that supports business goals, but also keeps people safe, because those things are intertwined. And the business isn't successful without having trust and safety as the cornerstone. So that's the TLDR there. And I spent a lot of my time meeting with stakeholders, getting them bought in on this work and excited about this work.
Very cool. So like, how does one get to this role? So we're going to get to that a little bit, right? So we have a former colleague, Sinead McSweeney. Shout out to Sinead. She did a TED Talk, which talks about her journey and the question that we're all asked as young people of what do you want to do when you grow up? And she actually talks about how that is becoming, potentially outdated because the roles that are available as Director of Content Policy at Spotify didn't exist when we were growing up.
Yeah.
And so we started with where you're at now. Let's go back. What did Jerrel want to do when he was growing up?
I wanted to be a plastic surgeon.
Wow.
If I'm being honest, that was
tell
the
me
thing.
more about
I
it.
wanted to be a doctor first. That was a big thing. And my mom has videos of me talking about wanting to be a doctor and be a physician. And I did internships at Johns Hopkins in the emergency department, trying to desensitize myself to blood and all of that stuff. I was like, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Get comfortable with it and make sure it's what you really, really, really want. Then I got to college and I liked chemistry. I liked lab and bio.
Yep.
But I didn't like it as much as the other folks who were sitting next to me. They had a lot more passion for it. And I had this whole thing about like dropping out of pre-med and all of that stuff and figuring out where I would go. And I had a really amazing counselor who sat me down and I was crying. I was a mess. And he was just like, after hearing your story, you sound like a helper. There are a lot of people who need a lot of help right now. Have you ever thought about the helping professions? Have you ever thought about therapy? Have you thought about social work? And I was just like, no, but I'll look at it, I'll look into it. And that's where I started. I started as a social worker.
Helper. Super powerful. So you mentioned you started as a social worker. Give some context. Like we're going to spend a little bit of time here. Give some context of your entry point into social work. Like what was that like for you? And how was that transition from what you wanted to be when you grew up into maybe what you were meant to be?
Yeah. It was hard. If I'm going to be honest, I felt like I was letting my family down by not becoming a physician, right, and being that person that folks could call on when there was a problem. But the other context at the time is when I graduated from undergrad, the economy had tanked. There were no jobs anyway
Yeah.
at that time. And so unless you could afford to live for free in another state with the hope that you might be converted into a full-time role, that was really what was out there. And my family is not independently wealthy. I'm first generation to go to college and all that stuff. So there was no safety net waiting for me. But there was always social work jobs. There was always helping profession out there. Anywhere you look around the world, there's always the folks who help. And when I moved back home, those jobs were right there waiting for me. And so I started my career working with really any vulnerable population you could think about: low-income families, seniors, people with severe mental illness, right? And feeling unprepared for that work. And then showing up and having the spirit of like, if not me, then who? And we can talk more about the parallels with trust and safety, but limited resources, people don't really know what you do, right? You're tackling problems and challenges that have not been solved. Like, despite all the advances, there are still people who are poor, right? There are still people who struggle for food and for housing. And it's not because of just like poor social skills and all of that stuff. There are systems and structures that need to change if people are going to be better. And I found my calling. And I was like, I can do this. I can engage with folks and I can really help them think about their lives differently and make sense of the world and navigate it in ways that help them achieve their goals. So I did that for a really, really long time. And I hit a ceiling a little bit, I would say. I don't know if you have social workers in your universe, but a lot of folks that do that work realize that the people who make decisions about what gets funded, about what programs you shine a light on, in most cases, never had to worry about food or healthcare or education. And so I was like, well, I'm going to be that voice. I'm going to take what I was seeing on the ground and apply it to more macro systems and represent the people who aren't in the room. And I did that for a while, and I worked for a few national nonprofits that brought me out to California, essentially, and then I got laid off. And I was in this moment where like, oh, I found my calling. I'm great at what I'm doing. Now what? And a friend was like, you should think about tech. You're in San Francisco. Why is that on your radar? Or why are you thinking about trust and safety? And I was like, what is trust and safety?
So let's maybe take a beat here, because I think this is a really interesting moment in time for you, perhaps, like as well. But just so when you're in this helping profession as a social worker, and it sounds like really entrenched in the helping profession, did you know about trust and safety? Like what, like you mentioned, tech wasn't on your radar, but like this concept of helper does pull through, I think, at least from my kind of experience, to trust and safety pros. When did you understand that was a possibility or like in the atmosphere for you?
It was conversations with folks in the industry, because before I threw my hat in, the way my anxiety is set up, I like to know what I'm getting myself into. So I did a lot of informational interviews with folks doing the work to hear like, what was their day-to-day like? What do they love about their job? What do they hate about it? And a lot of them were there for altruistic reasons. They want the internet to be better than what it was. But I did not know what trust and safety was. And then on recollection, I had lots of encounters with issues online. I was on MySpace back in the day. MySpace was a wild place to be, right? And we were all coding and managing our pages, but there were so many people communicating with each other. And there were many times I saw content and I was just like, whoa. I had no idea this was even allowed in online spaces. And so trust and safety was around me. I never thought it was for me because I'm not technical. And I think a lot of people outside of tech assume that everyone who works here has a degree, can write SQL, is focused on engineering and building systems. I couldn't build anything. And the fun fact, too, about starting at Twitter, I didn't even have a Twitter account when I started. Like, I was that far removed from tech generally. And in a lot of ways, I was in the right place at the right time. And my skills really, really carried me.
So talk to me about the right place and the right time. What is that? Obviously, you went on to work at Twitter. Talk about that right place and right time for you. Like, what was that role for you, and kind of what was that like entry point? What was like your first like, this is trust and safety moment?
My first trust and safety moment, I think, for me, it was that my healthy skepticism of technology and online spaces was a value add. And I didn't think that
yeah.
going in.
Love that.
A lot of trust and safety teams have what they call product trust.
Yep.
And so product trust are the proactive arm of TNS. They're out there meeting product managers and engineers, helping them identify the risk before the feature launches. And to be good at that, you have to be skeptical of what it can do. And that's hard because a PM comes in and they're like, my feature's going to be amazing. It's going to change the world. It's going to make so much money for our platform.
Right.
And you're there like, well, it could also hurt a lot of people
right.
too. And we have a track record of that. And so that skepticism, like, oh, I love this feature. It sounds a lot of fun, but here's all the ways I think it could go bad. And here's why I'm scared of it. That was my entry point. I was like, oh, I can do this. And then my other aha moment was the soft skills. Again, I had a lot of imposter syndrome when I joined, and I didn't think that social workers belonged in this space. And I was like, any moment, someone's going to come to me and be like, you had a good run. This was your time. You squandered it. You lost. Thank you so much.
Game over.
But then, like, a lot of the success and the way I stood apart in those early days were my soft skills, collaboration. If there was any kind of group coming together to think about solving a complex challenge, like put Jerrel on it. He's really good at building relationships. He's really good at taking complex information and translating it for lots of folks. And that comes from social work. It really, really does. We do that. Social workers do that every single day.
I think I might have been one of the people who was like, let's put Jerrel on that. You're completely right on the soft skill component of it. So like, you go in and are you feeling like you're at home? Do you feel like, obviously you went from like this journey, and home might be too strong, but like you went from this kind of journey of like, this kind of like helping profession. Did it immediately feel like you could add value? And like, how has that evolved through your time in trust and safety?
Yeah, the answer is no. I would say it wasn't until almost year 2, if I'm being honest, where I felt like I had found my voice in the space and what differentiated me as a worker, but also as a future leader. I knew I really wanted to be a people manager in that space. I wanted to grow folks in this industry. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to do that where I'm like, not only am I adding value and helping products shift and keeping people safe and managing complex escalations, but I also had a lot of folks who look up to me and feel like they have a place in this industry because they worked on my team. And it was something that like I totally did not expect at all. And once I found that, I mean, I joke with my folks, I'm like, they're gonna have to drag me out of it now because I'm in it. Now, I really, really am.
Yeah, I think you've built a strong sense of community in the roles that you've had. So I think you talked about like an aha moment. Those in trust and safety also always have an oh no moment. When was there an oh no moment that you can reference of being like, oh wow, this is real?
Yeah. A lot of them. So working on social media platforms, they are always on. And I think we know that in concept and in theory, but Del Harvey has a really great TED Talk from years ago where she talks about scale. And she has this line where it's like, if Twitter has 500 million tweets a day and there's a 1 in a million chance that something really bad is happening, that means on that platform, something really bad is happening all the time. And for me, I would like go home and I always thought I had really healthy boundaries with work. Something like social work a lot. You can't burn yourself out. And there were a few times I went home and I'm like, oh, because I'm done, that does not mean the platform is done or things are done. And there was that moment of like, oh no, am I ready to sustain myself? And then I'm not sure if you remember this.
Go on.
But we had a conversation in passing. It was something bad that day, or probably a lot of things bad that day. And you saw my face and I must have just looked really, really tired or burned out or whatever. And you pulled me aside and you were like, success in this space is a marathon, not a sprint. Don't burn yourself out now. And it's something I say to my folks to this day, and it's a good reminder. And again, the social work, I had those skills when I came, but you reminded me of that. And I was like, oh, I actually can do this. I can take my time and have progress over time.
It's true. I mean, this space is always on. I remember a time, and perhaps we even worked on this, when there was something bad happened at 3 a.m. East Coast time. And it was one of these things where where I think I went into a meeting with representatives of regions of the world that experienced this, and I made the mistake of saying, "Oh, it was a perfect storm of bad timing." And they said, "Well, your perfect storm of bad timing is 3 o'clock in the afternoon for us." And it hit me like very square. This was very early on Twitter, very squarely that it's a we're on the internet's global, fast, and humans have expectations as it relates to platforms and how they're going to operate. And so for me, it was just immediately this kind of concept of like an always on platform. I'm interested to get your sense of like, I haven't met anyone in trust and safety that's like, figured it out. We're perfect. What's a way that you would like to see the space get maybe 5% better, 8% better?
I think for me, leaning more into the concept that trust and safety teams support the business. I think when I started, I've always thought about them as separate, and in some cases in opposition of each other. That trust and safety teams slow things down, right? Or we're a cost center, or we are the sad path, right? And no one wants to engage with us when that's not the case. So much research shows that when folks are experiencing abuse online, when they witness it, they are less likely to log in, they're less likely to engage, they're less likely to post, less likely to do all the things that the platforms want them to do. It's a business imperative to do trust and safety well and to invest in it. And for me, getting comfortable with that, because I think also social work training, but also social justice is like radical, anti-capitalist and that kind of stuff. But the platforms do a lot better when they are leaning into these issues and solving them. And I want to make sure that folks who are coming in with these ideas about how the systems need to change and context of all the bad things that have happened also know that doing their jobs well helps the platform be better. And maybe there will be some days where it's like, oh, this platform is great because it has differentiated itself from a safety perspective. I trust them. I am not worried about how they're using my information. I really get it. That's what kind of keeps me optimistic about the future.
That. So there may be a young social worker listening, maybe even a aspiring plastic surgeon.
Okay.
Potentially an artist. People may not know you're an incredible artist. What would be your piece of advice for a young person curious about the field that we work in, who's maybe in the field of social work, that's interested in exploring it, or maybe would like a career like you have? What would you say to them?
I would, of course, tell them to go for it. And there's a huge community of folks like me with non-traditional backgrounds. It's been interesting since I went to TrustCon last year, how many more social workers I've met in this space. And there's a lot of them. And a lot of them are executives too, VP level social workers, right? We don't all put MSW behind our names on LinkedIn, but we're out there. So there's a community of folks there. But also, I think the biggest learning lesson for me is a lot of folks are just figuring it out. They're doing the best they can with the information and the resources they have available. And they're practitioners. They've got skills and they are focused. But you're not missing out on something. You're not missing that thing. You've got it inside of you already. And the people you admire are doing the best they can. They're not like, oh, I got this. My job is easy. I can do it every day. They are figuring it out, and they're trying to align folks around the vision to keep moving forward. And anybody can do that. And be confident that you can do that.
Very well said. What is the most misunderstood part about our work or about the humans that do the work?
That everything we do happens in a vacuum, right? And this is something I misunderstood as well. People are like, oh, Jerrel, you lead content policy. And they're like, the policy is so important. Just change it, right? That'll make everything better. Just write something new. And for me, I'm like, yes. And I cannot do this work alone. And now I'm very, very proud of the policies I've worked on. I'm very proud of the teams and the stuff that they have built. But our fancy little Google Doc does not change the material reality of the people who use the respective platforms that I've worked on. They don't. It really, really doesn't. We need to engage with engineers, product managers, comms, legal, partnerships, PR. All of those folks working together actually improves the experience for folks. So when I get that question, why not just change the policy? I'm like, great. let's change it right now. Do you feel better?
Then
Let's feel better, right?
Now what?
No,
Right.
we've got to align
Yeah.
people around that vision. I think that's something that I've done really, really well and leaned
I
into,
agree
and my
with
team
that.
does really well as well.
Talk to me a little bit about this, because I find it compelling, and I can relate to a certain extent about the concept. I think you frame them soft skills.
Yeah.
And for those of you who haven't worked inside of at least a version of a tech company that I've worked inside, they tend to, and this is generally speaking, tend to skew fast, tend to skew data driven, tend to skew just very ship it, and this idea of bringing people along, of slowing down to speed up but still going pretty damn fast, and really kind of educating and bringing the company along with, honestly, concepts that weren't openly talked about in the public discourse until 5, 6, 7 years ago. I remember having to literally go around the company and bringing them up to speed. You did a fantastic job of bringing the organization up to speed about what different harm vectors are, how you and your team, or we, thought about them, and what operationally was the response to them, and why it wasn't this or that. You talked about, like, this idea of, like, it being in a vacuum, the scale that it's working at. There was an important point in time of the trust and safety history that I feel like we got an influx. Like, it went, well, I mean, speaking very frankly, it went from like a Twitter, a cost center, to the strategy of the organization, of the company, in a matter of a year.
Health team,
Yeah. So, like, give a sense of, like, when you say soft skills, can you give a little color on, like, what you mean by that and why it's so important?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to say about that. For me, the soft skills part is important because most trust and safety teams are not in a position to say no. Right. And when you can't say no, you can't really stop the train when it's going. So the soft skills become important. Specifically, how do you get folks to think differently about their work? And so influence strategies really, really matter. And these are things that I picked up when I was doing public policy work and when I was doing social work. I couldn't change the law itself, but I could change how people thought about it, or what their agency was as they're navigating these really complex systems that they didn't create. And so one thing one of my old mentors would say is that you can be a leader out in front, or you can lead from the wings. And that's something I got really, really good at under your leadership. But there's also lots of other incredible managers that I've had in tech, and they know who they are. And I thank them all the time for it, but being comfortable with that when the train is moving really quickly and you're in this meeting and it's like, we need to stop this, right? Or then someone says something smart and I kind of slack them on the side. That's really, really smart. And that connects to the shared vision that we have. And that's enough. And then when we have a one-on-one or a coffee, and they're like, well, how's your day? My day is great. Here's what I'm thinking about now that we're moving forward. Like, those things. How do you help people think about their work differently and see you as a collaborator and a stakeholder? And I think in tech, I was like, it's my job to stand out and show myself. But again, my superpower was collaboration, getting a lot of people to be aligned on one vision. And I was very, very surprised at the kind of stuff we can accomplish when we do that. And I brought that to my role now, and it's definitely something I'm going to take with me going forward.
I love that. So, of course, at Thorn, we build technical solutions. We're very focused on, I would say, a really important, but a component of the large swath of kind of online harms. How do you think about staffing or preparing your team to capture the different kind of really important expertise within this kind of, like, ever-growing list of harms or adversary trust and safety matters?
For me, I always look for folks who are curious. Right? Healthy skepticism is also important. I started at the beginning. That's why I think added value for me, healthy skepticism, but also curious. You see something that is happening or you're aware of what's going on in our industry and you start to think, well, what could we do about that? Or how does that impact us? And they start to write or they start to do something with it. I have a lot of folks who are like, I do operations or I do marketing. I want to jump into policy. And they're surprised when I tell them that we write a lot. We're always writing and we're always researching. We're always thinking deeply about things. So that curiosity, I think, really, really goes a long way. But then I also look for folks who really want to do the work because it's work. It really, really is. And you've used pros, right? I like practitioners too. We are practitioners. We're not just do-gooders. Being influential requires skills that you can practice and get good at over the time. Getting a business to think differently about what it does means you have to understand their budgets and how they finance things, how we ask for resources, headcounts, partnerships, all of that stuff requires some knowledge and not just, this is great, we should do it. It takes a bit more than that. So comfortably doing the work, but also being curious, I think is incredibly important, especially right now because the technology is moving so fast.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really that folks may not understand fully about, especially folks on the policy side or operational side of trust and safety, is oftentimes, it was certainly the case with Twitter, is that like they're having to enforce things that rules that maybe on content that they at best don't agree with, at worst they personally find insulting or worse. I'm curious to give a sense of like, I think that to me is one thing that I would love for kind of humans to know about those that work in trust and safety. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what it's like to lead a team that is having to weigh things generally day to day from an objective point of view, and having to work within this kind of environment of kind of multiple kind of responses to things.
It's hard. And it's a thankless field in a lot of ways. And not because people don't like us, they just don't know what we do. And we know that we're not actually just twiddling our thumbs waiting for someone to text us something really bad. We're always on in a lot of ways, especially when we're in the office or in front of our computer. I think for me, there have been a few things that guide me. One of them is bias toward understanding and not agreement. Because the complexity of our work, when you ask 20 experts globally, what should we do about a particular piece of content, you're going to get a lot of opinions, and they don't always agree right now. And I'm fine with that. But I want you to understand what we're doing. What are the trade-offs that we're making? Charlotte, executive director of TSPA, says trust and safety is trade-offs to sadness, right? We can talk about the sadness part later, but the trade-offs piece is real. And so when you help folks understand what you're solving for and the trade-offs that you're making, they may not agree. But you can have much more productive conversations about where we're going when everyone's on the same page, especially engineers and PMs. They're so innovative and creative. When we give them a challenge and like why we got this challenge and where we're hoping to get, they come up with lots of ideas for how we can get it, even if they don't agree where we are. And so when folks are angry, I'm like, that's a good place to start. How do we translate that energy into excitement? And then for motivating my people, what motivates me is I know where we're going. I think the things that happen every single day can really beat you down, but I know what we're working towards. And for me, that's always inspired me to think 7 to 10 years, not just what's happening in front of us. And as a leader, I think a lot of ways you can show up by aligning folks around the vision and the values, even if you don't have an answer. And on purpose, I'll not give the right answer, even if I know, because I'm like, here's what we are solving for. Run with that. And maybe we might get to a solution that I can imagine or anticipate it, or we might get to something better too.
Love that. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about that I didn't hit on?
Not necessarily. I think we covered all of it. Social workers should be everywhere, and you belong in tech, definitely.
Indeed. So, Jerrel, thank you so much for joining. You are an incredibly hardworking and interesting person, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much for joining us.
I'm glad that you had me. Really, really appreciate it. Always. Anything from you, John.
Hey guys, I'm John Starr, VP of Strategic Impact at Thorn. Thorn builds technology to defend children against sexual abuse. If you're interested to learn more about our organizations or the solutions that we build, check out safer.io.